So, first of all, what is transparency? We're a global coalition of NGOs that, it's not on the name, but the point is to fight corruption. Transparency is a way to get there. We are present in over 100 countries all over the world, in 24 member states out of the 28. We have our secretariat in Berlin, and we have an office here in the EU. It's the first regional office we have, and I work on the integrity of the EU institutions. So, and what I work with is where money meets politics. So, political corruption, and that includes revolving doors, undue influence, so on and so forth. So these are the new forms of political corruption. And it's about lobbying or about unequal access to decision making that I want to talk to you today. So lobbying, is it good or bad? This is something that a lot of times people think that transparency is against lobbying. We're not. I'm a lobbyist. I almost feel like I'm in the alcoholic thing. Hello, I'm Vitor, I'm a lobbyist. But lobbying is good. It helps the it's part of the democratic process. Every person, every company should have the right to say what they believe should be done in a law that will affect them in the future. It helps make law more attuned to reality, but there is a limit. So if lobbying is good, undue influence is not. And I will give you an example. So this is the case that Daniel picked. I'm sure you all know this label. It's in refrigerators and anything you can find nowadays. Well, it's also in cars. And now, I'll ask you a question. Let's see if you know the answers. This was done by the EU, so to say, by the Commission, to show energy efficiency. So if you buy a product, let's say a refrigerator, how good is this product? How efficient is this product doing what it's meant to do? So let's pick these two cars. And now I want you to decide on the label. So on one side you have a 2-ton Porsche Cayenne, German-made. The other one you have the tiny Italian Fiat, 750 kilograms. Which one do you think is most efficient? So which one do you think spends less fuel to do a kilometer? Anybody for the Porsche? Well, the label says, if you want to go Sunday shopping, you take the Porsche. But let's go to another example. So on one side, you have again a German-made, but not a Porsche, a Leopard 2, a tank, a 60-ton tank. On the other one, you still have the Fiat. Which one would you take for your Sunday shopping? If you say the tank, you are correct. So this is the big difference between lobbying and undue influence. Where lobbying, the point is to bring a law or a policy closer to reality. Undue influence distorts that, and it is no longer for the benefit of society as a whole. So, and this is what we do. And I mean, Daniel picked that example, but if you can pick any other example. I mean, talking about cars, you can also say Dieselgate. There was the scandal in Dieselgate. In the US, the manufacturers already had to pay consumers for their faulty cars. How many people in Europe got their money? So, this is what we do. In this case is lobbying in Europe, but it could be any other topic. We do research, but we're not a think tank because we go a bit beyond that and we defend what we find. And on this case, you will see a study on lobbying in Europe, not in all countries in the EU. So we looked at 19 member states plus 3 EU institutions. And we looked at 65 indicators. Is there on that country a procedure for access to documents, since that is the topic of today? Is there a mandatory lobby register or not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the point was to look at transparency. Is the relation between policymakers and lobbyists transparent? Can the public see it or not? Is there integrity? Are there clear and enforceable ethical rules? Yes or not? And how much is it equal, the access to the policy? How much is it open to a plurality of voices? Can we all give our take in it? Well, and what did we find? And by the way, this was not a gold standard. We did not make what should be done or what we believe should be done. What we did was gather all the best practices from each of the different countries and put them together and see how each country or each institution will do with these best practices that are already in place a bit all over. Well, and what we find is that there are huge disparities between countries. I mean, if you look at the lowest one, Hungary, and the one highest, Slovenia, there's a big percentage difference. Number two, the highest country does almost, it reaches halfway through, but barely. The regional average doesn't even reach a third of the best practices. And there's also huge disparities between the institutions. The Commission is up there, the Council close but not quite. Third last. But now you can play the devil's advocate and say, well, why is this important? Why should we do this anyway? Why are these rules there? And for us, this is about managing risks. So if you say, for example, this is a bit like a law that puts a limit on speed of cars in front of a school. You'll have the core, which is the law, which says you cannot drive a certain faster than certain speed. But the law in itself is useless if nobody follows it and nobody enforces it. So, and for that, you'll have what is around the core, which is voluntary mechanisms. Do people want not to run over kids right in front of the school? Do they want to comply with, in this case, with lobby law that is in place? Are there voluntary ethical codes in place or not? But you also need the blue part. So you need the police to come from time to time and check if someone goes over the speed limit, because there's always someone that does. And that is what we, Transparency International, do. We're a watchdog. So we, journalists, other civil society organizations, etc., we point out the people that don't want to follow the rule. But for that, you need information. Now, and this is the role as a watchdog that I want to present to you a tool that we have. It's called Integrity Watch. And in this website, you can see many things. Because transparency in itself is not, as you will see, is not always helpful. So, here you can see all of the, and well, in one of the pages you can see every single organization that is registered on the lobby register. Not only you can see who they are, you can see how much they say they spend in lobbying, how many people they say that they have working in lobbying, and how many people have badges. And you would be surprised if you go to that website. You'll have organizations that declare 0 as a lobby budget and have 7 access badges to the European Parliament, or even more. So another thing that you can see is MEP incomes. MEPs can have other jobs besides being an MEP. And they can earn, of course, besides that. So do you know how much each declares? Well, it's not easy because every single declaration of financial interest is in PDF, which means non-readable format by machines. And it's also in all of the languages of the EU. I personally don't read many languages of the EU. Most of them, actually, I don't read. But, so transparency is there. They do follow the rule, but it's not really accessible to citizens. So we make it accessible. We read all of those 751 PDFs, and we put it there in any language that you want to read, meaning English. Well, there's also, you can also see revolving door cases. If there's an MEP, if there's a Portuguese former president of the commission who goes somewhere, well, record it. You can also see every MEP, every former commissioner, etc. Where are they working now? Well, and you can see also the meetings of commissioners. And this is good. This is information that allows us to be the watchdog. And now I'll talk about a bit about the commission meetings, which is right now, since November 2000, and there are no values. Since November 2014, if not mistaken, the commission publishes meetings, commissioners, cabinets, directors. And since then, we have 17,000 meetings. It's quite a lot, but it doesn't say the whole story. It also says, according to the lobby register, that the register in the EU is the largest in the world. Bigger than in the US, bigger than in Canada. Let's see if the resources we have to control these lobbyists are the same. Well, there's over 35,000 lobbyists, so we believe, because not every organization is there. There is no obligation. If you are a lobbyist, you can even enter as a visitor. I've tried. Nobody asks you anything. And there's or we believe around, this is our calculation, around 1.5 billion euros spent on lobbying. That is a lot of money, especially if you consider to how much I earn a month. That is a lot of money. So, well, the percentages are meant to be there, but they're not. So, but I can tell you corporate is about 76% or so, and think tanks about 5%, and NGOs more or less 17%. But that doesn't tell the whole picture. We're not saying here that it should be 50-50. But we can also look at the different portfolios. So we can see which commissioner has the most meetings. And if you'd be a budget commissioner, for lobbyists at least, they're not all created equal. So if you can see in certain portfolio you'll have over 2,000 meetings. If you're a budget commissioner, you had 20. So this is good also to know where the lobbying is being made and how it's related to what is being discussed now, which legislations are being discussed now, and so on and so forth. But we can also see what is the percentage of so NGO, industry, etc. What is the percentage that is meeting each of the commissioners? And you can see that in some portfolios, health, environment, it's close to 50-50 or even 50-50. But in other portfolios, it's not at all 50-50. But we're not saying, again, that it should be 50-50, because if you look at the case of Uber and taxi drivers, they would both be industry. Do they defend the same side? Guaranteed not. But what are we saying then? What we're saying is that so far the Commission is relatively passive when it comes to lobbying. So you can definitely approach them and talk to them. But how often have you received a call from the Commission saying, hey, we know that you're active in this field. so far didn't give us an input. Would you like to give us an input on this matter? Because so far we only received the input of these people. So they should be a bit more active. Ensure that when you are making policy that everyone does have access, has the opportunity to influence it. So the Commission President says that the EU should be a leader in integrity, ethics, transparency. But leaders don't lag behind. And we can see in many cases that the EU does lag behind. Council documents, how easy is it to get them? Nowadays, it's faster to get a document through a leak than through an access to documents procedure. So what are the principles, or at least the basic principles, that we should have in a mandatory EU lobby register? And I emphasize the word mandatory because we have one. We have a voluntary one. So mandatory should imply that it's obligatory for any person that is influencing policy to be registered. Otherwise, mandatory is a meaningless word. So if you're not registered as a lobbyist, you should not be able to meet people who shape, who do policy. No registration, no meeting. Everyone should be covered in those people that do the decision on the legislation. They should be covered. Yes, we have the meetings with commissioners and with directors, but we, for example, on the transparency negotiations, the position of the Council is being done by, or represented each country by one or two people in the General Affairs Group. Who are these people? It's very difficult to know who they are and who meets them. I've met them. Do you know who? Well, you can't because it's on our website. But besides that, you wouldn't be able to know. And we need better definitions, monitoring, and sanctions. How many organizations have been kicked out from the transparency register that we have now? We have over 11,000 organizations. Transparency, 2 or 3 years ago, went through these 11,000 organizations to see what exactly do they put on the register. And many of them in the fields where you are obligated to put something. So in which field do you lobby? They put a dot or a dash. You know how many of these? 4,000. 4,000 out of 11,000 organizations had meaningless entries. But in many times it's not even their fault. They don't understand. For example, we saw universities that they have 120 lobbyists when clearly they mean teachers. Ford Foundation said that they spent 600 million euros in lobbying some time back. They don't. If a foundation would spend half of the lobby budget, they don't. So many times it's about informing people to do it right. But there are no resources for it. So I was talking about the US and Canada. Canada has 3,000 organizations in the register. They have 25 staff to look over these 3,000 organizations. How many do we have? As far as I know, there are 5, maybe, 4.5. It's the 2 Martins. The people who do most about the lobby register, there are actually 2 people. So do we have the resources on the place? No, we don't. And resources follow political priorities. Who wants this? Well, citizens, definitely. We live nowadays is a moment in history that 10 years ago, and I'm sure none of you thought possible, that a member of our union decides to cut and leave. 10 years ago, I would have said this would never happen. It is happening. The trust in the EU institutions is dropping like a rock. In some countries, extreme right-wing is going to percentages that we never thought possible. And why is this happening? Because people distrust the institutions, they distrust politicians. In many cases, also because EU is many times blamed for things. Everything that is good, it belongs to the national. Everything that is bad belongs to the EU. So, do lobbyists want it? Last week I was in an event of PACA, so the Public Affairs Consultancies, the consultants of consultants. And they want this as well. Why? Because they follow the rules. And every time there's a scandal, it's not that lobby organization, it's every lobbyist who gets the bad rep. So those that follow the rules want to make sure that others follow as well. Those that don't run over the kids in the school want to make sure that others don't run their kids as well. European Commission, clearly, because they made the proposal and they are publishing their meetings. Now, who is blocking it? Well, naming and shaming a bit. Council is blocking it. Is Council blocking it as a whole? No, it's not. Or I think it's not. The transparency negotiations are behind closed doors. So, but I suppose, at least from my meetings with the permanent representatives, that not all states are against. Many states are in favor. But many are against. And the parliament, who also comes with, in my view, excuses. We can talk about the legal opinion, or in fact, we can't talk about legal opinions because I know most of you are lawyers and I am not, and I'm not going to pick a discussion on legal issues with 80 lawyers, definitely. But what I do know is that for half a century, all of our member states have been finding common grounds. We always come from the start with 28 different systems, and somehow we have always managed, or many times managed, to come to common ground. It seems that now it's impossible, and it's about transparency. So, but what we also need to complement this lobby register, I mean, today is access to documents, is not lobby register, but these things are complementary. They're part of the circles that I showed you before. And what we need is, well, the reform on access to documents. And Nick can tell you more about it later when he's here discussing what happened. We also need independent ethics oversight. The revolving doors issue. If you think when Durão Barroso, he did follow the rules, but clearly people were still not happy, because even people who work in the commission publicly showed that they were not happy. So there should be a certain amount of cooling off period, and definitely the people who decide whether you broke the rule or not should not be your former colleagues. Because did I break the rule? Yes or no? Let's ask Nick, who's coming later. I mean, this is not independent. And if you really want independence, can you really have it when the person deciding is now doing a job but thinks maybe 2 years down the line, I won't be doing this job and I'll be in that person's position? Do I want to set an example? And the legislative process, you know as well as I do, that, well, needs a bit more light. If you look at trilogues used to be used as a way of go second reading, there was no agreement. So people sit down and go, okay, we clearly don't come to an agreement, let's now discuss. But that's not what's happening anymore. Nowadays, it goes to trilogue immediately at first reading. So you don't even see, as a citizen, as an organization, as a lobbyist, you don't see what's happening. You only see the beginning and the end, when everything, as you say in Portuguese, is already cooked. So the web streaming of debates that are in the plenary, nowadays they're voted and there's not even discussion many times. It's just all in favor, yay. Thank you.